Hello everyone, you are watching Square Triangle Mouse, and today we are going to talk about the classical era cultures, which ones are strong, which ones are weak, which ones you should avoid at all costs. And just before I start, I will remind everyone watching that I play only on Humankind difficulty, so this list is based on my gameplay experience in the highest difficulty of the game. Now if you play on lower difficulties you might have different impressions, but this should work at least for the higher difficulties. That being said, I imagine there is going to be some debate. Feel free to write in the comments if you think I'm wrong about one of these cultures and why, and we will have a nice debate. Just remember to be nice to each other in the comment section. So without any further delay, let's go to the classical era cultures. We will go in alphabetical order, and so we start with the Achaemenid Persians, and the Achaemenid Persians go all the way up here. I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by this, because come on, everyone loves the Persians in this game. You have your specific trait, Cyrus Shadow, that gives you +2 city cap. That on its own could already justify the highest tier for the Achaemenid Persians, but also you have +10 stability on city or outpost, so that makes, you know, classical era expansion even easier. And of course, classical era is the era of expansion in this game. You will want to expand as much as possible during the classical era, so of course that's just an excellent unique trait. Also, the imperialistic cultures have been buffed since the game launched, so that's another good thing for the Achaemenid Persians, and everything else is just alright. So the satrap palace is good, gives you some influence, some money, you know, a little bit of everything. It's a nice district, not great, but good enough. And the emblematic unit, the Immortals, they are also good. They are anti-cavalry, and that's a good thing, because in the medieval era, the technology that allows you to upgrade classical era anti-cavalry into pikemen is one of the earliest medieval technologies that you can get. So you can very quickly upgrade these guys once you get to the medieval era, and that's a very nice advantage. Also, you might want to defend against cavalry during the classical era, so having anti-cavalry as a emblematic unit is actually kind of nice, but mostly they are up there because of their trait. Their trait is so extremely strong that I cannot really imagine, like, even if the emblematic quarter was weaker, even if the emblematic unit was really weak, I might still give them an S tier just because of how extremely strong that trait is. It's always better to have more cities in this game, and if you add to that some extra stability to make expansion easier, I mean, what's not to like about that? The second culture in our video are going to be the aksumites, and I'm going to put them right here in the middle of our board. So the aksumites are okay, they are just not super strong. We have a merchant culture in them, and obviously it's not so easy to get the merchant era stars in the classical era because you're not going to be making so much money. But you do have some help with their unique trait, +2 money on every tile producing money. That's not a bad trait for a merchant culture, and the emblematic quarter also helps. You get more money for every territory under your religion's influence, and you get some extra faith to help you with that. Also some extra money just on its own. Overall, it's a good district. It's not extremely strong at this point in the game, because it's going to take you a while to spread your religious influence, especially on higher difficulties, so it's going to be a while until you get really a ton of money from that. But by the late classical era, you're probably going to be generating a nice enough amount. And also you have a very nice emblematic unit. It's a melee unit called the Shodelai. It's stronger than your average swordsman, and just because of that it's a good unit. Any strong melee unit is going to be good for conquest, and you will want to make some conquest during the classical era, so the Shodelai I think is a fairly good unit. Overall, this is just a good culture that is not super great, mostly because it's not going to be so easy to get those merchant era stars, but also because, well, all in all, you get some good things but nothing super great. We now go with the Carthaginians, and I'm going to put them up here, tier A. And so these guys are also a merchant culture, and that's honestly the only bad thing about them, that they are a merchant culture, because they don't have so many good things to get more money. Basically their emblematic quarter will not give you more money, but it will give you a very nice amount of industry in coastal water or lakes, and that makes it very, very nice because industry is just very good in this game. Industry gives you everything else, basically. So having more industry is always good, and that's why this emblematic quarter can be considered very strong. The only exception, of course, could be if you're playing Pangaea. So keep in mind that if you're playing Pangaea, these guys could be like here, maybe even here. They would be way, way weaker in a Pangaea map. I would just not get them at all. Maybe here because the elephants might be a bit stronger in Pangaea, but overall they are up here because of the Gotham. The Gotham in a normal map in which you can get a lot of coastal territories is going to be very good. If you're playing with a lot of islands or very small continents, then it could even be up here, but on a regular map it should be around tier A just because of the Gotham. The unique trait gives you minus 25% on all constructibles by outcoast. That is not bad at all. You usually want to speed up your construction, so being able to do it for cheaper amount is always good. And finally we get the war elephant. As I said, that's the only thing that could be good about them in a Pangaea map, but in normal maps I'm not a huge fan of melee mounted units. They are not so strong. I mean, they are very strong, of course, in open field, but they are not good for taking cities. And during the classical era, you are usually going to want to conquer cities. That's why these war elephants are not going to be great. I basically put them up very high because the unique trait is generally very good in every era, and the emblematic quarter is going to be very strong in most maps. You are not getting anything that gives you more money per turn, so getting those merchant era stars is going to be even more difficult than it would be with the aksumites here. But you can get every other star much faster with them because you get more production, so you get more districts. You can also get more districts that give you more food or more infrastructure that gives you more food. So that's going to give you the farming stars as well. And you can also get more units to conquer faster because you're going to have more production. Basically, the Gotham gives you more production, and more production gives you everything else. Our next culture in this list are going to be the Celts, and the Celts will be placed up down here with the Aksumites in the middle of our board. So they are an agrarian culture. They get +2 food per farmer on city or outpost. This is basically the same thing that the granary does for you, only with the Celts you get it for free, or you get 1 extra granary if you already had one. But if you've been playing the game for quite some time now, you will know that the granary is actually not so impressive early on. The animal barns will usually get you more food, so having an extra granary is not so super great. It's not bad for an agrarian culture, it's never bad to have more population, but it's not super awesome. The emblematic quarter is quite alright. Gives you some more food per attached territories, which is something that should increase during the classical era. It gives you some faith, also good to spread your religion. And it gives you some extra food per adjacent farmer quarter. Now this one is kind of a weak advantage because you should usually not be building a lot of farmer quarters. The farmer quarter is one of the weakest quarters in this game. So this final advantage I don't really like. The emblematic unit is the Gaesati, and just like the Aksumites, the Celts have a melee unit that is a bit stronger than a swordsman. That's always nice. It's not super strong though, it's not like a game changer or anything, but it's nice. Overall the Celts are not terrible, they're just not great, so they are here together with the Aksumite. And now we are getting one of the first weak cultures of this era. And of course we are talking about the garamantes. They will go down here. And let me explain why I don't like them so much. First of all, their trait, Desert in Bloom, gives you some extra influence on the main plaza if the city is growing. But at this point you might have only 2 cities in your entire empire. So this is going to be only +10 influence, best case scenario. I mean, the city will probably be growing, but still it's only 10 influence, which is obviously not a lot. By the time you get your 4th city, we are going to be talking about 20 influence per turn. Again, not a lot of influence, so this is never going to be a game changer. It's not a game changer in the classical era, and it's going to be even less relevant later on in the game. We have an agrarian culture with the garamantes, and their emblematic quarter will give you some extra food and more food per adjacent sterile terrain. which again, it's not something you will want to have because you will not be building either your cities or your outposts in terrain that is close to sterile terrain. You will be building everything around rivers because that's what's best for you in almost every era with almost every culture. So having an advantage for sterile terrain is very niche. It's only good if you're the garamantes, and it will immediately stop being good once you reach the medieval era. So you're not going to do that just to get this advantage for the garamantes. It's just silly, and you're not going to be playing towards that. You're going to be playing against that advantage. So it's not really good for you. The only reason I didn't move the garamantes to the very bottom of this list is because of the emblematic unit, the javelin riders. As a general rule, I tend to enjoy range units that are mounted. They can move quite a lot, so you move several tiles, you shoot, and then you go back, and that is almost always very useful in combat. Those are units that are fun to play with and also useful in terms of strategy. That is a very nice combination, of course. And so basically the emblematic unit is the only thing that sort of saves the garamantes, but even those are not so extremely strong, so the garamantes are still just a C-tier culture. Now we have one of my least favorite cultures in the entire game, which are the goth, and I will put them down here. So let's explain a little bit why I hate the goth so much. First of all, their trait is going to give you more influence on garrison. A garrison is usually a weak quarter, so you are not going to be building a lot of them. Maybe if you play with the Mycenaeans in the ancient era, you will have several of them because they are the emblematic quarter of the Mycenaean. It's a garrison, so you will have some of them. Then maybe this bonus is a little bit better, but it's still not so much. It's only +2 influence. And then you get some extra ransack bounty. 5% is going to be gained as a science per units on army every time you ransack something. In my last full game on this channel, you can see that I actually played with the goth because I was testing the new wonder that is called the Stables of Ramesses, and that wonder gives you better cavalry, so I decided to try the goth. And I did not get so much science from ransacking. I was trying to ransack as much as possible, which is already quite a bad strategy on its own. You usually don't want to ransack a lot. You will want to conquer a lot and just keep everything that you conquered. But I tried to play against that logic. I tried to ransack with the goth, and I did not get so much science from this, so it wasn't such a good advantage anyway. The emblematic quarter is not completely terrible, gives you some influence and some faith, and some more faith for adjacent district. The problem with faith is that it's going to become useless by the second half of the game mostly, or at least the last quarter of the game, so that extra faith generation is not going to be so great for you, but at least it's going to be useful early on, so I guess it's something. And again, you get more ransack gains, which you were already getting with your trade. So basically the Goths are a whole culture built around ransacking, which you don't want to do so much as a general rule. So they are built around a strategy that is not so good to begin with. Finally, you have heavy cavalry with them, and as I mentioned before with the Carthaginians, unless you're playing on a Pangea map, this is not going to be so good because you're not going to be getting so many open field fights. If you get open field fights, sure, the Gothic cavalry is going to be super strong, but you're usually going to be conquering cities, and the Gothic cavalry, just like any heavy cavalry, any cavalry that is melee, that is, they're not going to be so good at conquering cities. So that's why I don't like them so much, especially for the classical era, because you want to conquer cities during the classical era. And now we have the Greek, and the Greek are going to be right here in the middle of our board. As you can see, we have several average cultures in the classical era. They're okay, just not super great. So the Greeks are a scientific culture. They give you +2 science per researchers on city or outpost. That is not too bad, it's also not great, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And because they are scientists, you will be able to access medieval era technologies with them, which is quite advantageous. You can get medieval era units before anyone else, and that can give you a very nice edge in combat, which is always good in this game because warmongering strategies tend to be very, very strong in Humankind, even more so during the classical era. I do like the emblematic quarter, gives you +3 science per era and +1 influence per era, so it scales with time to keep it relevant in the late game, and also +2 science per adjacent district, which if you plan properly could be a relevant amount of science, so it's a nice quarter. Not super great, but nice. Finally, the emblematic unit are the hoplites, and they are anti-cavalry. Again, you might be facing cavalry during the classical era, so that's not bad at all. The AI tends to love cavalry way too much, so having anti-cavalry is good. And of course with the Greeks is even stronger than it was with the achaemenid Persians, because you can get the medieval era technologies, and as I mentioned before, you can get the medieval era anti-cavalry units very early, because they are one of the very first technologies in the medieval era. So you get your hoplites and then you very quickly upgrade them to pikemen in the medieval era, and that's just very strong. You should be destroying like your Hun neighbors, or I don't know, if it's not the Huns, it's going to be the Goth, or just, I don't know, the Carthaginians maybe. Any neighbor that has cavalry units can get easily destroyed if you are playing with the Greeks. That's a very nice advantage. Overall, not a super strong trait, but a rather nice emblematic quarter and a unique unit that combined with the scientific affinity can be very nice. So overall, a nice culture, even though it's not overpowered. And now we get the Han, and at the moment of the recording of this video, the Han go down here, but I wouldn't be surprised if this changes in the future. So what's the problem with the Han right now? Well, if you play the Together We Rule expansion, well, first of all, if you didn't play the Together We Rule expansion or you didn't buy it, then you can just skip this part, of course. But if you played the Together We Rule expansion, you will know that the leverage actions are still rather weak, and well, leverage on its own is still rather weak, and getting the diplomatic era stars is very difficult. So having -20% on leverage action cost is not going to be useful almost at all for you. The paper mill gives you more science, well, it creates a deposit of paper, and the paper will give you more science, 12 science per paper every time you get the leverage intel collected. So yeah, that could be, if you have several paper mills, that could be a lot of science every time you get a leverage. The problem is it's not so easy to collect leverage, so that's not going to be so strong as it sounds on paper. See what I did there on paper? Okay. Anyway, it's just not a good emblematic quarter at the time. Finally, we have an emblematic unit that is a range unit, sort of a crossbow before crossbowmen, right? Crossbows before the medieval era, which makes sense if we're talking about the Chinese culture. And so it gets stronger attacks after it's been defending for one round. The problem is you usually don't want to defend for one round with range units. You want to attack all the time, because that's the whole point of having range units. So I'm not a huge fan of that special bonus of the crossbow. So overall, not a great emblematic unit, even if it's not terrible, but certainly not a great emblematic quarter, and a really bad unique trait, at least for now. If the leverage actions become stronger in future patches, then that's going to be nice, but for now they are very weak, and therefore I have to put the Han culture down there, which is a shame, but right now in this game they are not very strong. And now we go with a very different culture that sounds very similar. It's not the Han culture, it's the Huns. So the Huns will not be so low as the Han culture, but they're not going to be so strong as some of you might think. I'm going to put them here. Now, I have seen that some beginner players of Humankind have a lot of problem defending against the Han, because the AI will create a lot of mounted units, a lot of these guys, especially in higher difficulties, and you will think that that is just impossible to defend against, but that is absolutely not the case. Defending against these guys is actually easy enough if you have enough anti-cavalry. Well, if you're playing the Greeks or the achaemenid Persians, just forget about it, you are going to destroy them. But even with the Carthaginians, for example, you can destroy them. With the Goth, you can destroy them. There are a lot of unique units that can destroy these guys, and even with a simple spearman you can do good work against them. And they are not so strong for human players. They get more science on empire per unit that is in hostile territory. That is kind of nice, because you will want to be conquering, in the classical era. The problem is that in the classical era, especially at the beginning of the classical era, you are not going to have so many units, so you're not going to be conquering with so many armies. You are going to have armies of 4 units, and you are going to be bringing maybe 2 armies. That's a total of 8 units on every conquest campaign. So it's not going to be so much science, but it's going to be nice, and also you get some extra strength on cavalry units, which I guess is fine. But as I said before, I'm not such a huge fan of cavalry units in general in this game, so that's not super strong. The Ordu means you cannot attach territories. That's really bad in my opinion, but it does generate, the food for the unique unit, so that's nice. The emblematic unit, they gather food through fighting and ransacking in order to multiply, but they cannot enter fortifications, so they cannot enter enemy cities, and they cannot be added to a regular army either, so that makes them not super strong. Sometimes the AI is going to even try to invade your cities with armies composed of only Huns, and they only have 1 tile range, so if you put your civilian units further than 1 tile from the walls, they can never attack you, and that can be very funny actually. You just let the rounds go by and they can never take your city. But they can move and attack in the same turn, which is always nice. As I said with the garamantes, that's a very nice trait for an emblematic unit. Overall, I would say maybe the Huns are a little bit stronger than the garamantes. If I had to pick between those two, I would definitely go with the Huns. But I don't think they're good enough to compete with these guys here. That's why I leave them here in the C tier. And from the weaker cultures we go once again to a strong one. Now we are talking about the Mauryans, and these guys will be all the way up here. Yeah, they are very strong. So what's the deal with the Mauryans? Why are they so strong? Well, they have an aesthetic affinity, and that's going to be very good in the classical era. You can use their special ability to get hundreds of influence points during the classical era, and in the classical era of course you want to expand a lot, so that very large amount of influence points coming to you all of a sudden, they are going to help a lot with your expansion. And because the classical era is so much about expansion, that aesthetic culture trait is going to be very good. Apart from that, you get the unique trait of the Mauryans, +1 influence on emblematic district. That's fine enough, even if not great, and minus 10% on attached outpost cost. That second part of their emblematic trait I think is very good. As I said before, the classical era is all about expansion, so attaching outposts for a smaller price is very nice. I really like their emblematic quarter. Yes, it does have some faith, but not so much, so it's just enough faith so you can expand your religion during the early part of the game, but not so much that it becomes completely useless later on, after you get the 4th religious bonus. You get +1 influence, +3 science, +2 influence per adjacent district, and +1 science research slot on every city or outpost. That's a nice amount of influence, spatially, and a little bit of extra science on top of it. Overall, it feels like this emblematic quarter gives you a little bit of everything, and I'm very much okay with that. And finally, you have a very strong emblematic unit. We have an elephant that can shoot arrows, so that's just great. I mean, the elephant is not shooting the arrows, obviously the soldier on top of the elephant is shooting the arrows, but you know what I mean. It's just a ranged unit that comes with an elephant, so it's very nice. It's strong, it has a nice range. Overall, you will want to use these units quite a lot in your classical era wars. So you have a nice trait, a nice emblematic quarter, a very strong emblematic unit, and of course the aesthetic culture bonus in the classical era, which is just really good. That's why I think the Mauryans belong up here. Basically everything about them is good. Now we go with the Maya culture. I'm going to put these guys up here. They are very strong. Maybe not so super strong as the Maya or the Achaemenid Persians, but they are strong. Usually the builder cultures tend to be strong, and the Maya are not a huge exception to that list. So you get +2 industry per worker on city or outpost. That's obviously always nice. And you have the emblematic quarter that gives you more industry per attached territories, a little bit of faith as well. We can see here a lot of quarters give us a little bit of faith during the classical era. And also we get +4 industry per adjacent maker's quarters, and of course we will want to build several maker quarters throughout the game, so this +4 can become +8, +12 very soon, and it's going to be very nice for you. Also an additional worker slot, that's never a bad thing to have. The one thing that I don't love so much about the Maya are the noble javeliners. They don't have the indirect range sight that the archers have, so it's a little bit more difficult to get shots with them. When you can get shots with them, of course they are good, they are going to really weaken your enemies, but you don't have the indirect sight. They do have the poison status, but the poison status in my opinion is not so good at having indirect line of sight, so that's why I don't fully love the noble javeliners. And that's why I don't put the Maya all the way up here. They get one step down just because of that little issue I have with their emblematic unit. Still a very strong culture, maybe stronger than the Carthaginians, especially if you don't have a lot of coastal territories. And now we'll talk about what is probably the weakest culture in the classical era, one of the weakest cultures in the entire game, and of course that is the Nazca. They go down here, they are worse than the Goth, and I think they will be worse than the Han at the end of it, because I have a, as I said before, I have a hope that the Han culture will be buffed. Basically I have a hope that all of the diplomatic cultures get a buff. So the Nazca, what is the problem with them? I mean, sure, they're aesthetic, and when I talked about the Mauryans, I said, hey, being aesthetic in the classical era is awesome. Yes, that's great, that's basically the only good thing that there is about them. But the problem is you don't get so much influence with them. Your Nazca lines are going to give you +2 influence only on emblematic district, so no extra influence for adjacency, for example. That is not so much influence, you can get much more with the Mauryans. And only +1 faith on emblematic district, and even faith is not so strong in general in the game, you just need a little bit of it. And that faith alone obviously cannot change the status. So you have a lot less influence than you would with the Mauryans. So if you're going to pick an aesthetic culture to expand faster, which is a very good strategy, why not pick the Mauryans instead? They are great in every aspect, and here you have nothing else. You just have an aesthetic culture with no proper aesthetic culture advantages. You get +1 bonus emblematic district on territories that contain a natural wonder, and that is completely ridiculous. Why would you care about that? You might have maybe one territory with a natural wonder during the classical era. Sure, this legacy trait will be maintained, so of course if you conquer 2 or 3 more natural wonders later on, you're going to get a little bit more there, but it's still just 1 more bonus emblematic quarter on those specific territories. That's almost nothing. That's a very silly legacy trait. It might be the worst legacy trait in the entire game. I haven't decided on that yet, but it's a very weak legacy trait. Definitely the worst one in the classical era. Especially if we think that the leverage that the Han culture gets should get buffed in the future. Right now they are both really bad legacy traits, but I think this one will get buffed. The Nazca, it doesn't look like they will get buffed anytime soon. They've been on the game for quite some time, and they are still absolutely terrible. Oh, and I almost forget the emblematic unit, the headhunters. They are not very good. When a headhunter destroys an enemy in battle, it inspires the allies, so you get +2 strength. +2 is not so much, and it only happens when this specific unit kills someone. So if an archer, for example, kills someone from behind, then the ardor doesn't happen. So you're not going to be killing so many enemy units with these specific guys, and so that's why their bonus is not so great. But mainly what I hate about the Nazca is just the legacy trait. It's such a silly legacy trait, I don't see the point. And finally we have the Romans. So the Romans were very weak when the game launched, but since then the expansionist cultures received a very nice buff. Another reason, by the way, why the achaemenid Persians are so high. And now the Romans, I think we can put them here with some confidence. So what is good about them, apart from the expansionist trait being so much better right now? Well, their legacy trait is nice, +1 unit slot available for each army so early in the game is going to be really strong. Also some additional experience per unit, which of course early in the game is much stronger because you have a lot of time for your units to gain experience, so the legacy trait is really nice. The emblematic quarter, I like it. It gives you some influence, it gives you some fame if you complete it when the city is victorious, that's very niche. But it also gives you some extra stability per adjacent district. Extra stability in the classical era is nice because you are going to be expanding quite a lot. So the extra stability plus the extra influence is overall really nice for expansion. Finally, the Praetorian Guard is a melee unit that is clearly stronger than the regular swordsman, so I like them. It gives you some nice rear attack bonuses, which are okay. It's always good to have some extra bonuses during the fight. Overall, a nice culture for the classical era expansion. Maybe not so extremely strong later on, but you should have a nice classical era if you play with them. I would say among these four, maybe the Romans are right now the strongest of the bunch, but that's up to you to decide. I mean, let me know in the comments if you think one of these three guys is actually stronger than the Romans. I could say the Romans are just a little bit weaker than these two guys, but they are almost there in tier A right now, after the expansionist trait obviously got a very nice buff several months ago. And that's it. This is the tier list for the classical era cultures. I imagine there's going to be a lot of debate. Maybe you like the Goth, maybe you don't like the Mauryans so much, I don't know, let me know in the comments. And I will tell you that if you subscribe to the channel, you will eventually see a full game on the highest difficulty, in which I will pick only the weakest culture of every era. In this case, it's probably going to be the Nazca. I think they are going to end up being the weakest culture in the classical era. So that's the one I'm going to pick, but you need to motivate me to complete the tier list of every era by clicking that very nice like button. It's completely free and it really helps a lot. So thank you for that. And as usual, thank you very much for watching.